I'll never forget the night the porch light flickered like a warning sign, right before all hell broke loose in my neighborhood. It was the kind of night where the air felt heavy, like a storm was rolling in, though the sky was clear. And it all started because Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, decided that her teenage son deserved to drive my truck. Now, this wasn't just any truck. It wasn't some shiny new toy off the dealership lot. This truck was my father's, a deep green 1978 Ford F-150. Restored with my own hands, every bolt tightened with memories of my dad teaching me to turn a wrench. The truck wasn't just metal and paint. It was a piece of my family's history. My boy rode in it on his first day of Little League. My wife and I sat in the cab after church on Sundays, holding hands, listening to the radio. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was dignity. It was legacy. So when Karen's son, Tyler, swaggered up to me in the driveway one evening, baseball cap turned backwards, music blaring from his phone, and asked if he could take the truck out for a spin, I laughed at first. I thought he was joking. "Not a chance, son," I said, shaking my head. "This truck's family. She doesn't leave my sight." But the smirk on Tyler's face didn't fade. He leaned against the hood, like he already owned it. And that's when Karen came strutting down the street in her heels, clutching her HOA binder like it was scripture. "My son deserves to drive that truck," she said flatly, as if the matter was already settled. "He's 16. He needs experience. And frankly, leaving a vehicle like this in the driveway is a safety hazard for our community image, I swear." "I felt my blood boil right there, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This truck isn't a toy. And it sure isn't up for community discussion." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret disrespecting me." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. The next day, whispers spread faster than smoke through dry grass. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed near my driveway, stealing glances at the truck. Someone even left a note on my windshield. "Be a good neighbor. Let the boy learn." It was like the HOA hive mind had been activated. Karen's voice carried across the block as she told anyone who'd listened that I was being selfish, neighborly, even hostile. But here's the thing. I wasn't just any homeowner. I wasn't just a guy with a truck. I was the police chief of this town. I'd spent 25 years serving this community, protecting it, sacrificing holidays and birthdays to keep folks safe. And yet here I was, being painted as the villain by a woman who thought the HOA gave her power over everything, including my father's legacy. One evening, as I sat on the porch, my son Daniel came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one beside me, his jaw tight. "Dad," he said, "why don't you just tell them who you are? That you're chief?" I took a slow sip, staring at the truck glinting under the porch light, because, "Son," I said, "dignity isn't about pulling rank. It's about standing firm when people push you. If I use my title to win, I lose the lesson." But deep inside, I could feel the storm brewing. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was the type to escalate, and escalate she did. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of a camera shutter. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Tyler circling my truck with his phone out, recording videos like he was building a case. Moments later, Karen posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, "Uncooperative Neighbor Hoarding Community Resources." Truck is an eyesore, a danger, and should be made available for responsible young drivers. HOA rules state shared safety comes first. The audacity nearly made me choke on my morning coffee. She had twisted my father's truck into a community resource. By sunset, half the neighborhood had an opinion. Some supported me, sending quiet nods of encouragement when they passed. Others avoided eye contact, clearly siding with Karen. But the real breaking point came that Friday evening. I had just come home from a long day at the precinct. The house smelled of roast chicken, my wife humming in the kitchen. I was about to sit down for dinner when headlights flashed through the window. Then came a loud, insistent knock. When I opened the door, there stood Karen, arms crossed, her son standing smugly beside her. "Last chance," she said. "Let him drive the truck. Or I'll make sure the HOA deals with you." I took a step forward, my voice calm but firm. "Karen, no one, not you, not the HOA. Not even the mayor is taking that truck out of my driveway. Do yourself a favor. Drop this." Her face turned red. She spun on her heels, dragging Tyler toward their house. But not before hissing one last promise over her shoulder. "You're going to regret this." And as I watched her storm away, I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. Because the very next night, blue and red lights filled the street. Karen had called the cops, and she didn't know she had just called me. The night Karen called the cops, I was sitting in my recliner, boots off, flipping through old photo albums with my wife. We were laughing at a picture of Daniel in his Little League uniform, cleats 3 sizes too big, his smile missing 2 front teeth, when I saw the reflection of flashing lights ripple across the living room window. At first, I thought maybe there'd been an accident nearby. But then came the pounding on my door. Heavy, sharp. The kind of knock that rattles the frame. My wife's face paled. Who on earth? I stood, my chest already tight with anger and disbelief. When I opened the door, 2 patrol officers stood there, their cruisers parked haphazardly across my lawn. Behind them, a crowd of neighbors was gathering, porch lights snapping on one by one, like spectators at some backyard circus. And at the center of it all, standing smug with folded arms, was Karen. "Sir," one of the officers said. Reading from his notepad, "We've received a complaint about a stolen vehicle. A resident claims you've unlawfully retained possession of a truck that doesn't belong to you." For a moment, I was so stunned I couldn't speak. Then, I saw Karen's son Tyler, grinning ear to ear, like he'd already won. "That's my truck," he said loudly, puffing his chest. "Mom said it's community property. This guy won't give it back," the neighbors murmured. Some looked confused. Others nodded, as if they believed every word. And then Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp and theatrical. "Officers, this man refuses to follow HOA guidelines. He's been hostile, dangerous even. That truck is unsafe, and he's denying a responsible teenager the opportunity to learn to drive. Frankly, I don't feel safe with it here anymore." The lies hit like bullets. Unsafe? Hostile? Denying a teenager? Every ounce of restraint in my body was tested. My jaw clenched. My fists tightened. But I stayed silent, watching as the officers scribbled on their notepads, glancing back and forth between Karen and me. That's when my son Daniel came out onto the porch. He looked from the flashing lights to the crowd, then to me. "Dad, what's going on?" he whispered. I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right, son. Just stay calm." Inside, though I was anything but calm. Karen had crossed a line, dragging the law into a petty power play, dragging my family's dignity into the mud. The officers turned back to me. "Double quote, sir. Do you have proof of ownership for the truck?" I almost laughed. Proof? Of course I had proof. The title was in my safe. The truck was registered in my name. My name was etched into every memory that truck carried. But instead of running inside to grab documents, I looked Karen square in the eye. "You want to play this game?" I said softly. "Fine." I motioned for the officers to wait, then stepped inside the house. My wife looked at me nervously. "What are you doing?" she asked. I opened the closet, reached for my badge and service belt, and clipped them to my waist. When I stepped back out onto the porch, the crowd gasped. The officers froze. Karen's smirk vanished like smoke in the wind, because now I wasn't just some neighbor with a truck. I was chief of police. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, holding out my badge, "this vehicle is registered to me. This is my home, and these false claims are a waste of department resources. You've been misled." One officer swallowed hard, nodding slowly. The other looked from me to Karen, clearly furious at having been dragged into her stunt. But Karen, oh, she wasn't done. Her voice rose higher, shriller, cracking under the weight of desperation. "So what? You think being chief means you're above the rules? You can't just hide behind a badge. That truck is community property, and I'll take this to the HOA board." The neighbors gasped again, whispering fiercely. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others edged closer, hungry for the drama, and that's when Tyler, her boy, emboldened by his mother's tirade, stepped forward. balling his fists. "You think you're tough 'cause you're a cop?" He sneered. "You're just some old guy with a truck. That should have been mine." I stared at him, my chest heavy with both rage and sorrow. This boy had no respect, no humility. Just entitlement spoon-fed by a mother who believed rules bent to her will. "Son," I said quietly, "you've been taught the wrong lessons." The officers began dispersing the crowd, embarrassed, muttering about filing false reports. But Karen kept yelling, her words tumbling over themselves. "This isn't over. You'll regret humiliating me. The HOA will vote on this. You'll see. You'll all see." Her voice echoed as she stormed back to her house, dragging Tyler by the arm. Neighbors lingered, whispering in clusters, their eyes darting between me and the truck. And then, one by one, the porch lights began to flicker off, the street returning to uneasy silence. Inside, my wife placed her hand on mine. "Why didn't you stop it earlier?" she asked softly. I sighed, staring out the window at the old Ford sitting in the driveway like a sentinel. "Because sometimes," I said, "a lesson needs to be seen to be believed." But Karen's not finished. She'll come harder now. And when she does, the truth will be her undoing. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen had already taken her fight to the HOA board, painting me as an abusive cop who used intimidation to keep a truck hoarded from the community. She passed out flyers, wrote angry posts, even cornered neighbors in their driveways. Some folks avoided me entirely. Others whispered encouragement when Karen wasn't around. But the tension was thick, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. That evening, as I walked out to grab the mail, old Mr. Jenkins from 2 doors down called out from his porch. "Chief," he said, shaking his head, "I've lived here 40 years. I've seen bullies come and go, but I've never seen one this brazen. Don't let her win." His words hit deep, because this wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about respect. It was about the kind of community my son would inherit. And as I looked at the sunset glowing behind the old Ford, I knew one thing for certain. Karen thought she had power. But she had no idea what she was about to face, because she hadn't just picked a fight with a neighbor. She had picked a fight with the chief of police. And the next round was mine. The morning of the HOA meeting felt like the calm before a storm. The sun rose red over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street. I stood at my window sipping black coffee, watching as Karen marched door to door with her clipboard, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. She had called for an emergency HOA assembly. Word spread fast. By evening, the community center parking lot was packed. Cars lined both sides of the street. Neighbors who usually minded their business now filed in with folding chairs, eager to witness the showdown. And at the center of it all, my truck. Karen had insisted the Ford be towed to the meeting as evidence. Of course, the tow company refused. The truck was registered to me. But Karen, not one to admit defeat, convinced Tyler to drive it down the street that afternoon while I was at work. Only problem was, he didn't make it far. Halfway to the community center, the engine sputtered and died. Tyler had flooded it trying to jam the clutch. By the time I arrived, sweat dripping down his forehead, he was sitting red-faced in the cab while Karen screeched at him to fix it. I didn't say a word. I simply turned the key, coaxed the engine back to life with the kind of care that only comes from years of knowing its quirks, and drove it myself to the meeting. The look on Karen's face was worth more than gold. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Folding chairs lined up in rows, a cheap podium at the front, HOA board members sitting stiff in their seats. Karen stood proudly in the center aisle, clutching her binder like it was a holy book. Tyler slouched behind her, arms crossed, still sulking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice dripping with authority she didn't have, "we are here to address a serious violation of community standards. One neighbor, a so-called leader of this town, has refused to cooperate with basic HOA guidelines. He hoards dangerous, outdated vehicles. He threatens those who question him. And worst of all, he denies our children the opportunities they deserve." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered, eyes darting toward me. Karen pointed dramatically at the back of the room, where I stood tall, hands clasped behind me. "This man," she declared, "is the problem in our community. He hides behind a badge, but he is no better than a tyrant. And I demand the board take action to seize his truck for the good of all." The crowd buzzed like a hornet's nest. I stepped forward slowly, letting the silence fall heavy. When I reached the podium, I placed my badge on the wood with a sharp click that echoed through the hall. "My name," said evenly, "is Chief Robert Hayes. I've served this town for 25 years. I've protected your families, walked these streets at night, stood in the rain to keep you safe at parades, and sat with grieving parents when their children didn't make it home. I've missed birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries because duty came first. And now, after all that, I'm standing here accused of being a danger to the community because I refused to let a 16-year-old joyride in my father's truck." A hush fell. "Even the board shifted uncomfortably," I continued, my voice steady but edged with fire. "This truck isn't an eyesore. It isn't community property. It's a piece of my family. My father taught me to drive in it. I taught my son to respect it. It represents dignity, history, and hard work. And no HOA clause, no entitled demands will ever strip that away from me." Karen tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "And as for the lies told to law enforcement dragging officers from real emergencies just to settle a personal grudge, that is not just disrespectful. It's criminal. Filing false reports, wasting taxpayer resources, harassing a public servant. These are serious offenses." The officers who had come that night happened to be in the back of the room. I caught their eyes. They nodded grimly. The murmurs in the crowd swelled louder now, but this time they weren't in Karen's favor. That's when old Mr. Jenkins stood up. His voice cracked with age, but carried weight. "I've lived here longer than most of you. That man," he pointed at me, "is the reason this town is safe enough for you to complain about trucks in the first place. Karen, you've pushed us around long enough. It ends tonight." Others joined in. A woman in the front row stood and said, "I saw Karen's son trying to break into the truck last week." She encouraged it. The younger father added, "If the chief hadn't kept his cool, this could have gone real bad. We should be thanking him, not attacking him." The tide had turned. Karen's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came. Tyler muttered under his breath, slumping deeper in his chair. Finally, the HOA president cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances and the overwhelming support for Chief Hayes," he said cautiously, "the board finds no violation here. The truck is his property. The matter is closed." Applause broke out. Neighbors clapped, some even standing. Karen tried to shout over it, her voice cracking, but no one listened. For the first time, her power had crumbled. Later that night, as I pulled the Ford into my driveway, Daniel sat beside me. He hadn't said much during the meeting, just watched it all unfold with wide eyes. Now, in the quiet hum of the engine, he spoke softly. "Dad, you didn't just win for you. You won for all of us." I glanced at him, my chest tightening with pride. "No, son, we did. Because when you stand for dignity, for family, for respect, the truth always finds its way." The porch light flickered again as we stepped out. Not a warning this time, but a welcome. Neighbors waved from across the street. For the first time in weeks, the air felt light again. And Karen? She stayed inside, curtains drawn, her reign of intimidation over. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about a truck. It was about values, about how far some people will go to take what isn't theirs, and how dangerous it is when pride turns into entitlement. The truth is, communities aren't built on HOA rules or loud voices. They're built on respect. On knowing the difference between what's yours and what belongs to your neighbor. On honoring the legacies left to us by those who came before. That old Ford still sits in my driveway today, polished and cared for. Every time I see it, I don't just see my father's truck. I see the night I refused to back down. The night dignity stood taller than entitlement. So if you're listening to this story, I'll leave you with this. Respect isn't given to the loudest person in the room. It's earned by the ones who stand their ground quietly, even when the world tries to take what matters most. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, or an entitled neighbor who thought they owned more than their share, I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Let's remind each other that dignity, family, and respect will always outlast selfishness and greed.